It's very hard to summarize 3 days like this in 15 minutes, so I'm not even going to try. I'm going to begin, though, with thanks to a lot of people. And I really want to thank Scott Friedman because he's done an extraordinary job here, and he deserves a round of applause for putting all this together. So thank you, Scott. And Terry Willey and Jeff Smith. Your fingerprints are all over this, and we appreciate that a great deal. And the staff that you've brought. We also should thank Lenny Aiken and his marketing team and the IT group who's been out there and been organizing everything and keeping us on the web. But I've got to end my thanks with Dennis because this was his idea. Dennis, for various reasons that came together, said, you know, there's something missing here that Stanford and places in Silicon Valley have. And why is that the case? Well, that resonated a lot with me because last summer, my wife and I were at the Aspen Institute Ideas Festival, and we had dinner with some of the presenters, and two of the presenters were students from Stanford. One was from the business school, and one was from the medical school. And they had invented an infusion bag for Iraq and Afghanistan military activities that didn't have to be held up. It would feed itself sitting next to the patient. And the reason they did that, or next to the victim, the wounded warrior, and the reason they did that is because they realized, one of them who had been in combat, said, you know, we're wasting manpower by having someone who has to carry the combatant and the other who has to hold the bag. So these guys live in a culture that is so creative and so innovative that as a routine part of their curriculum, they, from different schools, got together because they were friends and figured out that this was a good idea. And of course, it's patented and it's licensed and it's being used now by the Defense Department. And it is a real breakthrough, even though there may not be a lot of money in it for these kids, because the real breakthrough is there's one less person who's now exposed in combat to take that military man off the field. So when Dennis said, you know, we really have to figure out what's missing in New York in general, Mount Sinai in particular, because that's our concern, around innovation, he was exactly right, and it resonated with me, and we've had these 3 wonderful days. But as Michael Marin just said, and I think it was really poignant, it doesn't happen just because we had a conference for 3 days. The work has to go on, and it has to become a part of our culture. So what I want to talk about in the 10 or so minutes that remain for me is what holds us back and what's the paradox around innovation that I think stymies so many places from having the kind of culture that exists in Santa Clara and San Francisco. And we start with this paradox. There's never been a better time for innovation in biomedical sciences than today. I mean, this is an extraordinary time for us. People have heard me say this before, but if we lived 100 years ago and we were all physicists, we might be getting together thinking, this is an incredible time for physics. I mean, look what we've done. Look what we've thought about. And they would have never guessed that I would be able to sit here and take out, you know, a BlackBerry and take Scott's picture and have it in China in milliseconds. But that's where we came from. We offer the same possibility to the next century. The things that we're doing today will restructure humanity over the next 50 to 100 years. There will be some centers that will be leaders in that, and there will be some centers who will kind of be bystanders and participate. There will be some centers like Silicon Valley that led what were the end stage of the revolution in physics, and there will be some places in biomedical research who do that. The question is, can we make sure Mount Sinai is? And that's what this is about. But the paradox is that even though those are the opportunities have never been greater, there are cultural and operational issues that happen both externally to us and internally that make that difficult. And I want to address some of those so we can ferret them out and think through together what might be some of the answers. So what are some of the external problems? We probably are living through about the worst disparity between opportunity for scientific research and funding for scientific research. If only 7% of grants get funded, and it's only going to get worse as we move toward the fiscal cliff, we know that we're going to be faced with study sections that will be more conservative than ever. As much as we might want to take risk, you can be sure, and I know, having written my share of lots of successful grants, that if you don't have the tightest work conducted to date section that looks like this grant is a layup to be successful, it's not going to be funded. So we're faced with a very conservative NIH and a very difficult funding situation at this juncture. What else do we have? Well, we heard, and those of you who are sensitized to the venture capital community know, that the enthusiasm that existed for biotechnology in the 80s and 90s just doesn't exist anymore. We were told that there are 50% fewer VCs funding biotechnology and 50% less money. So that's a lot less opportunity. We know that the patience of VCs have run out. We know that the business model has changed. For all we have to do is fund these smart guys, and we'll develop a story, and we'll take it public, and we'll all cash out, and then to hell with the scientists. They're on their own after that. That business model never worked. It made some money for people in the 80s and 90s, but it didn't work for the scientists. But now it's not even working for the VC community. It's going to be much harder for us to get the money. And that's a real external problem that is going to hamper our innovation. We also have, we didn't spend that much time with it, but there's patent law policy that also hinders innovation. I mean, this issue of first to disclose may have a chilling effect on some of our scientists who really begin to worry about, do they dare publish a paper, and do they dare write the grant? And will the tech transfer office be fast enough in filing the disclosure and the patent so that their science can go on, particularly because they've got a grant deadline due, and as we pointed out, 93% of those grants are turned down, and their first job is getting funding at Mount Sinai to do their science, not to set up a company. So that's another real problem that we have. And I can go on and on with patent law. You heard the members of the pharmaceutical industry discuss how if you don't have strong IP around the intellectual property, it's worthless. And use patents are regarded by most of the industry as almost useless. And since we're not a synthesis house, as much as we've put together core facilities in antibodies and in chemical synthesis, a lot of ideas are actually going to be use ideas, new indication ideas. Unless we strengthen some patent law around uses, could protect us a little bit more, that's an avenue that's going to be increasingly choked off to us. So, what are we going to do about the external factors? You've heard me say this before. I think it's important to say it again. In the next couple of weeks, as some grand bargain is struck around the fiscal cliff, if we don't input into that process, we are in great danger. We're in danger for the hospital, we're in danger for the school, we're in danger for our science, we're in danger for our patients. It won't be enough for you as a scientist or an MD to simply write a letter to our congressman. They're on our side by and large. That's not where this is going to be played out. You have to mobilize the patient groups to really go down to Washington and say, save our hospitals, save our science, save the physicians, save the students. That's at stake. They'll listen to the patients. They're not going to listen to us. We are too self-serving. So we've got to lobby. What else can we do? We're not going to give up because there are fewer VCs. We're just going to realize that it's going to take better ideas. So don't be discouraged. We're just going to have to be better, and we can be better. But we should also recognize, and I think these 3 days have made that clear, that there is more than we have to sell than just a chemical entity. We can be selling new apps, we can be selling software, we can be selling healthcare delivery systems. There are lots of good ideas that are coming out here that we perhaps don't often conceptualized in an entrepreneurial sense, but they are. We've seen Dennis and I, some extraordinary things that Eric Schadt and Andy are doing. That group is coming up with just fascinating ideas. They pulled out an app that may have for an iPhone and similar devices that will take your human genome, and you might subscribe to an application that will update the information about your human genome based on what the scientific discoveries happen from month to month. So your risk factors can be modified as you'll know them as they're being identified. It's a great idea. And there are ideas like that all across Mount Sinai, how to deliver care better, some other apps for how we can talk to our patients more effectively. There's real intellectual capital there that we should think about selling. So what are some of the internal problems in our culture? Well, when I became the CEO, one of the first things that I did was walk around from department to department with meetings in the basic science departments to talk about where we were and where we think we ought to go. And one of the points I made almost 10 years ago was we really needed to have a royalty stream. We really needed to think about generating more intellectual property. And some of the people I met had the courage to say to me I was a Philistine. At least they said it. I don't know how many people were thinking it, because we came from an academic model of purity in which we didn't deal with commercialization. There are a lot of people at Mount Sinai who believe that, and there was a tradition of that that stemmed back to when this medical school was founded. There was no tech transfer office. There was no encouragement of commercialization. It was quite the opposite. The assumption early on, when Bob Desnick did what he did, and I was making some connections to companies as I was doing, was that there was something wrong with that. There was a kind of pseudo-criminality to this gray area that we were working in. Now, obviously that's changed, but I think we have to recognize that there still will be people who have a hesitancy to work with pharmaceutical companies or biotechnology, and that's a big mistake. That you've heard from the people who hear they need us as much as we need them, and that our goal, as Dennis has said repeatedly, how we will be measured for success over the next decades is not going to be how many dollars of grants we had. And it may not even be how many times your papers were cited. It's going to be how many breakthroughs in medicine did you provide so that the next generation of patients will not suffer from the same diseases as this generation of patients. That your grandparents would have had a series of diseases that your grandchildren aren't going to have because of what we did. That's the end game here. We're a hospital that gave birth to a medical school. We're patient-centered first. And that's where it has to pay off. So, what else can we do to begin to change the culture and to make sure that we value entrepreneurialism and innovation? I think what we're going to have to say to our promotions committee is that patents matter. That's got to be an important part of the evaluation. Starting companies matter. Commercialization matters. Those are all good things. I can tell you an irony of how our field, I'm talking about the scientific field, and in the case I'm going to raise, the most respected society in the work that Dennis and I do is the American College of Neuropsychopharmacology, ACNP. Very hard to get in. And it's for people who are doing brain science that relates to the pathophysiology of disease and leads to therapeutics. So every year, trustee of Mount Sinai and my wife, Bonnie Davis, inventor, goes to the ACNP and participates in the meeting. And every year somebody will say, so why did you apply for membership? And the answer is, having been on the admissions committee, nobody counts patents. They're all interested in how many papers have been published. But here's an example of one of the few drugs that actually have gone to market in the field of neuropsychopharmacology, And the person who's responsible for that is at the meeting every year, but the culture of the organization, the most respected organization in our field, would have enormous problems figuring out what to do with that application. The culture has to start to change. So at Mount Sinai, it can change in our promotions committee, but that's only a start. What else do we have to do? You heard from Bob Desnick how when he started a company, Mount Sinai policy was to discourage, not only to discourage, to make it impossible to have a seat on the board. Now, unheard of in Silicon Valley that a founder of a company wouldn't sit on their own board. But that was Mount Sinai policy. What does it say about us and our culture that is inherent in a lot of the decisions we make and our knee-jerk reactions about certain things, that was our policy that we've had to fix? But still, it may permeate the atmosphere here, and it's got to stop. We're going to have to think about stock ownership is okay in your own company. Board membership is okay in your own company. You could even be the CEO of your own company. We'll find a way to make it happen. All right, what else must we do? Well, obviously we have to encourage collaboration with industry. That's clear. But as we've talked about, there are things that we do have to worry about with industry. I mean, industry has hardly been the champions in some areas of the most ethical conduct as it comes to drug discovery and drug development. We all read the newspapers. So what do we have to watch out for? Well, I think there's a difference between being involved in drug discovery and drug development. We want everyone here to be a part of the discovery movement. We should think, yes, you should be a part of the development movement, but be careful. We want to have the best new drugs for our patients. We want you to be principal investigators and bring those drugs to our patients. But don't sign up for studies that are Me Too compounds that aren't really going to help our patients. And then there's this caution. Don't become involved in the marketing side. That's not for us. Don't become opinion leaders. Don't go out there and be shills for the company. That's not what we do. That's not the best way to represent Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is a part of the discovery process, is going to be appropriate in the development process, but let's not be recognized. And what we're not saying about entrepreneurship is that you should go out and give lectures at night to groups about the fourth antidepressant that's just like all the other antidepressants, and then try to convince the audience that it's in some way superior when in your heart you really know it's not. That's not the place for Mount Sinai scientists and Mount Sinai physicians. So that's my caution. Now here's my conclusions. There are 3 reasons why I think we have to encourage innovation and entrepreneurship. And I'm going to start with the least important first. We're going to be living through a very, very difficult business environment. No matter what happens in the next few months around a budget reconciliation, we will be losers. Our margin is already very thin. It's going to get much thinner. The Affordable Care Act, in and of itself, will hurt Mount Sinai for hundreds of millions of dollars just because of the disproportionate share payments we're going to lose. And that's just the beginning that we thought we had to cope with. There's possibilities of cutting GME funding. There's possibilities of funding our reimbursement for outpatient procedures. There'll probably be across-the-board Medicare funding cuts. There are going to be cuts to Medicaid. It's all not good. We have to have another source of income to maintain the excellence that we have in patient care and in science. Royalty streams are invaluable to that. It's our future. We're going to have to substitute those funds for what we will inevitably lose because the country, federal and state level, can't afford the healthcare system the way it is now. Second reason, I think there's a social contract that we've all been engaged in with our fellow citizens who are taxpayers, and that is we've taken their money to do their science. There should be a return on investment for those taxpayers. It's not enough for us to just go to the lab and have a good time and think that that's what's appropriate, that this country is so wealthy that that's what we should do. This is a contract, and we have to produce for our citizens who are paying our salaries. And the last reason is the pipeline's empty. The pipeline for the major drugs that we need just doesn't exist. The major public health menaces that are out there, we don't have therapeutics for. We don't have a hint, really, as how we're going to slow or prevent the dementias. We do very, very poorly on what we're going to do to prevent and manage and really make a big difference in the obesity epidemic and the consequences of diabetes. So the healthcare drivers that are so important in why, such a large factor in why the healthcare system can't afford itself, don't have drugs as a solution to those problems. Imagine today what healthcare dollars would be like, how much healthcare we'd be spending if we didn't have a Salk vaccine. Well, that's where we are with the dementias, with obesity, with type 2 diabetes, and other major problems. So there is a moral imperative for the public good that we bring our ideas to commercialization and to product. If we don't do that, I don't think we're fulfilling our mission on Earth. And that's where I want to stop. So thank you. We're going to do this again next year. It'll only be a day and a half. But I think that this is a very important cornerstone to Mount Sinai going forward. And again, Dennis, thank you for doing this.